Good evening. My name is Phil Thornton. I'm the superintendent of schools here in Cumberland. Welcome, everybody. We have two great panel discussions scheduled for this evening on standards-based grading. The format is a 45-minute question and answer for our panel, followed by 15 minutes for folks in the audience to ask questions. And then we'll have a brief intermission, then our second panel with the same format. Our moderator for this evening is Mr. Bob Mitchell, our assistant superintendent of schools. So, Bob, I'll turn it over to you to start our first panel. Bob.
Thank you, Dr. Thornton. And good evening, everyone. Welcome. We have two major goals this evening. One is to provide as much information as possible regarding this transition to standards-based teaching and learning. And the second is to learn how standards-based grading will impact the college admissions process and also opportunities for merit scholarships. Panel one will be responding to that first goal and the question, why standards-based grading? Let me introduce the members of panel one to all of you. To my far right is Virgil Hammonds. He is the superintendent of schools for the RSU 2 district in Maine. Dr. Donald Holder is an associate dean in the College of Arts and Sciences at Bryant University. Dr. Sharon Lee is the director of multiple pathways at the Rhode Island Department of Education. Dr. Brian McCadden is the Dean of Professional Studies at Providence College, and Dr. Fran Mossberg is a fellow with the Institute for Learning at the University of Pittsburgh. And I want to thank you all for volunteering your time to be with us this evening. As Dr. Thornton said, the format will be this. We'll be asking the panel questions that were submitted by members of the community to us. We'll do that for 45 minutes, and then for the final 15 minutes, we will give members of the audience an opportunity to ask questions as well. So, to start the process, we would like for the members of panel one to, as an introductory question, can you please, in 1 or 2 minutes, share with us how standards-based grading will impact your current role? Superintendent Hammonds, if you don't mind.
Sure. A common question that's asked of us in our school district. We're in year 2 of expecting proficiency on our standards, on all of our standards from all of our children. And that is quite a question, and that's something that we tackled quite a bit in our school district. And for us, what the identification of clear standards has done for our kids and our staff and our parents is that the expectations are crystal clear to everyone. And once that was articulated, the expectations, and it was articulated that we were going to support and assist every child in accomplishing those proficiency requirements, learning and expectations and the rigor that was lacking in our school system accelerated. And it's quite amazing. And for us, in respect to our university system, when universities call and want to inquire about what proficiency means to us, a common phrase that I use is that our standards, which I can clearly articulate to you, is our guarantee that our kids know all of this information, all of this knowledge, and have experienced the knowledge in a way that's meaningful to them. And for us, that's what standards-based grading has done for us.
Thank you. Dr. Holder, what does standards-based grading mean to you in your current role?
Well, my role is a little bit different because it's higher ed, and one of my responsibilities is to prepare teachers to become high school teachers, or candidates to become high school teachers in a Master of Arts in Teaching program. So I teach a class in curriculum. I do teach the Common Core standards. I teach the professional standards. We look to understand what the standards mean. We look on strategies on how to teach the standards. We look at methods to assess the standards. It makes sense that the missing link is then how do we grade the standards and student proficiency? So one of the tasks that my students have is to design a standards-based report card for high school students. But in a prior life, when I was a superintendent in Connecticut, we had a standards-based report card in the kindergarten. We had an extended school year kindergarten that was a state model. The parents loved the standards-based report card in kindergarten. It really gave a more realistic portfolio of the student. And then when they entered grade 1, we went to the traditional report card. And parents were quite upset. They said, how come we can't carry the standards-based report card into the other grades? So we made an attempt. I'm no longer there, so hopefully they're having some success doing it. So in my role is to teach candidates who will become high school teachers what the standards are, how to instruct them, how to evaluate them, how to report them, and how to create a report card.
Thank you. Dr. Lee.
Good evening. As my role as the director of the Office of Multiple Pathways, I'm responsible for the secondary regulations. And in the secondary regulations, we require that graduation be proficiency-based. And much of the system is built on proficiency-based components. So if we think about the performance assessments, we think about the common tasks that many people use to build a graduation portfolio. Those are graded on rubrics. They're graded on against standards, and students are determined to be proficient, against those standards. We also are looking at the national trend and in conversation with higher education. And as someone who has taught graduate school and undergraduate school, in Rhode Island, I graded my students with a rubric, and it was standards-based. It was, 4-3-2-1. So, it's a fair and equitable way of grading, what a student knows, and it's an indication to others that, the student has mastered, the information and the skills that are defined for that, content or that thing that they're doing. So, as in my role as the director of the Office of Multiple Pathways, going toward proficiency-based or standards-based grading is very important, and I'm excited to work with Cumberland as you take this step forward.
Thank you. Dr. McCadden.
Like Don, I work with teacher education. Part of my responsibility at Providence College is to manage the teacher education programs. And all of our students, as Don described at Bryant, all of our students, they take classes in assessment. They learn how to design lessons that align to NECAP standards, to content standards, to special education standards. They get practice in teaching to those standards. And they assess using those standards. So as Don said, I totally agree with that point, that then the missing link is then grading by standards, because right now, and I will back up a second too, as college instructors, we all use rubrics in our assessment of our own students. And our students learn how to design rubrics and use those as assessment tools. So, but right now, the part that is a little awkward is that once you design instruction, deliver it, and assess using rubrics and using standards-based models, you then have to convert back to a traditional grading-based system. And so if you go to the full end of the process and use a standards-based grading system, you don't have to do that conversion from standards-based to the traditional grading system. So it seems like a good proposition.
Thank you. Dr. Mossberg.
In my role at the University of Pittsburgh, I travel throughout the country working in districts and specifically working with the Common Core state standards in the PARCC assessments. And my job primarily is to ensure that the lesson plans, if you will, the old-fashioned term, we call them units of learning now, are aligned to the standards that are delineated in, for example, ELA in the Common Core state standards. And we also study how the assessments will roll out for those standards, and which will be required in 47 states for kids to take. And that assessment system is based on a 4-point rubric. So primarily my job is to work in schools and transition them from the grading ABC to the 4-point rubric, keeping in mind that this is truly a national trend, not only in schools and districts, but also for teacher evaluations and the AP exams. Everyone is coming into rubric, so it's a trend for the future that will kick in 2014. So that's the trend.
Well, I think that's a great segue into the next question, because the next question is exactly that. What is the current trend regarding standards-based grading? And my sense from the questions that we received, on the website was that, our perception was that, a lot of parents are feeling that, this isn't happening in too many places. So can you give us some sense of, based on your experience, what you think the trend is? And Superintendent Hims, if you could just talk about, perhaps you could talk about the law in Maine that is requiring all districts to move to this system of teaching and learning.
Certainly. Last year, the Maine legislature approved LD 1422, which by 2017 requires that all public school districts graduate students with a proficiency diploma. And the requirement is that all students that complete our high school requirements don't leave with a minimal understanding of the standards, but rather a proficient understanding of the standards. So there's a huge push and an initiative across the state to establish how do we clearly articulate what the expectations are for our children? How do we create that continuum K through 12? And how do we match the rigors of the new Common Core, which we're all hearing about? And then also, how do we assess that a child is proficient? And so a great deal of work is occurring across the entire state, not just through RSU2, but every school district, some because of the mandate, but most because they know it's the right thing to do. And it's been interesting and great, and a large reason that I moved to Maine from California is because of the commitment from the state, but more importantly, a commitment from the teachers and the administrators and the communities to develop a system that is personalized, that is customized, and yet it is rigorous enough to ensure that all of our kids that graduate meet the challenges for whatever dream they aspire to accomplish once they leave us, whether it's college or work or whatever it may be. So it's been amazing to see the level of collaboration that's occurred across the state. Though Maine is large in size, we're small in terms of population, much like Rhode Island. So it's been truly amazing to see the collaboration that's occurred with educators across the state. And I don't know if I...
No, that's great. Thank you. Dr. Holder.
There are also other models. Educators look at Fairfax County and look at Montgomery County in Virginia as models. Very large county school districts, about the size of Rhode Island, are larger. And they've had standards-based report cards through grade 8 for a number of years with certainly success. The state of Hawaii, which is unique because it's one state and one school district. The entire state is one school district, has had a standards-based report card through the 8th grade for a number of years. And you can look at cities like Omaha has gone to standards-based report cards, now introducing it into the high school. Milwaukee through the 8th grade, now moving into the high school. So it is happening across the country.
Thank you. Dr. Lee.
And I'd like to build on Superintendent Hammond's comments about Maine. And as part of a consortium across the region, the New England Secondary School Consortium, our partners in New England are moving to proficiency-based, standards-based graduation requirements. And as part of that work, we are working with higher education, and we have endorsements from the public institutions of higher education in Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine. Connecticut is in conversation. Rhode Island has agreed to endorse this, but they've signed an endorsement to say that they recognize and encourage and endorse proficiency-based, standards-based grading and in no way would that limit a student's ability to get into any of those colleges. And there's conversation going on with the elite colleges, the elite private colleges, in those states as well. And they are in conversation and willing to also endorse that, because many of them already look at a variety of transcripts. One of the other very interesting things about the trend is that many of the transcripts now are going to be electronic. Rhode Island is developing an electronic transcript, and as part of that transcript, there will be a standards-based portion of that. So we are preparing for the future and developing this electronic transcript for Rhode Island that will include a standards-based component, because we believe that is the future.
I'll go back to teacher education, which is what I do. It's not really a trend, but it's just, as you said earlier, the next logical step. We're in a standards-based environment. We've been in a standards-based environment since the mid-90s. So preparing future teachers to grade, do standards-based grading is just part of the process. And I kind of take a little bit of, the word trend bothers me, because it's not really necessarily, it's not
Oh,
trend.
I'm sorry I used that, Dr.
That's,
McAdams.
no, but the idea is not trendy. It's not the next, it's not the next hot thing. It's not like the next fad.
point.
It's just part of the process. And the funny thing to me is to flip it around and say, why haven't we done this sooner? If we've been in a standards-based environment since the 90s, why haven't our assessment and grading systems been converted much sooner than now?
Dr. Mossberg.
So I'd like to build on what Dr. McCadden just said. There's a couple of issues on the table here, and that is that the current standards under which we are all working are very different from the standards in the early 90s. They're very complex, and if you've had the opportunity to look at them and study them the way most of us are doing in education now, it's impossible to give a letter grade for such a complex act. Because when we talk about lesson design now, and we talk about pedagogy that underlines all the teaching and learning that's going on, and we talk about the catchphrase, what kids know and can do, well, when you tease that out and think about knowledge in doing, what the standards are requiring is that not only do you have knowledge of something, but you need to activate it in such a way as to perform it or show some kind of proficiency in some kind of working knowledge, if you will. So there's an application side. So if you look at it in a three-dimensional mode of, say, for proficiency, the process and the product of say, a unit lesson, you can't give one grade for that. It demands a rubric. And the whole notion of rubric is in my estimation, not so much for parents or for teachers, but for kids to understand where they are in the continuum of learning. Rubrics are not a secret. When kids understand what the rubric requires, the kid can actually manage his or her own learning through the process to get to product. And so when I work in schools throughout the country, depending on where districts are in that development of rubrics, if you have elementary schools who are working on the standards-based grading, and the middle and high school aren't, well, what do you do with those kids when they get to middle school? You change the game on them? All of a sudden, they're coming from a rubrics-based and a performance-based environment to an end game that says this is an A, B, or C. It doesn't give them much information. So I agree, it's not a trend. It's really a movement toward being very practical in saying, this is what kids are learning, this is how they demonstrate their learning, and here's where they are in their learning. And it's not a race against the next person, like I don't want to be better than Brian. It's a race against me. How am I doing in that learning? And I know where I stand in that learning. And that's really more important for a kid to know where he or she stands in their learning, because then they can become better at it. So there's no mystery. Enough said on that?
Yeah, well, the next question was going to be, and I think several of you have offered some of the advantages of standards-based grading. Would anyone on the panel like to add to what Fran and like I said, many of you have already offered some advantages, but would anyone like to build on the advantages of standards-based grading?
Yeah, I'd like to, just spend a minute talking about the advantages. One of the things about standards-based grading that has an advantage over a number is really being able to assess a student's progress toward proficiency. And so rather than waiting until the end game or a summative assessment where you have a number, you have the ability using a rubric and having students, produce a product and being assessed against that rubric and knowing that, they've mastered some of the things that are in that rubric and some of the things that were required of that task or that assessment. And yet we can very clearly pull out of that complete product those pieces that they're not quite proficient at. And that's really important to know that, it really is a very powerful tool for looking at student progress. And the other thing that's important to know, I think, one of the things that I think is an advantage of standards-based grading is that you are measuring quality. You're measuring quality and you're not measuring quantity. So you really are looking at the quality of the work and really looking for mastery and not just did they do it. And often I think with our current grading system, we just give a grade because they did it. And I think it's really important to know that in order for them to be successful, for students to be successful post-secondarily, it's really about knowing that they can do something. Not just that they've been able to, check it off and get a number, but that they can really, they know how to do something, and they can transfer their, that information, that knowledge and skill that they have to post-secondary, college or, careers or jobs or those kinds of things. So I think those are a couple of things, and there's many more, but, I'll let the other panelists weigh in on that.
I just want to add that I think what a standards-based report card offers parents and teachers and students is a deeper understanding of the learning that takes place in the classroom. Fran talked about the 3 Ps, their performance, their process, and their progress. If you think for a minute, if the child comes home with a report card in English, they get a grade of B, what does that really mean? What does that mean? In a standards-based report card, we talk about these are the outcomes, these are the expectations, and this is how well the child has performed. We look at the process. We look at quizzes, we look at homework, we look at their habits of mind that they brought to the task. And then we personalize it because then we look at their progress, not comparing them to the class of 28, but their progress towards those expectations. It's rich information, it's useful information, it's helpful information.
Thank you.
A common question we receive quite a bit is, well, geez, Mr. Hems, if you're expecting proficiency of all children on all standards, what about the kids that typically struggle? And our response to that is and our evidence is actually the opposite of what people think. When you target the instruction, when standards are clearly identified, and a teacher can identify where the child struggles, not on a unit, but on a particular aspect of that standard, and you target you target the intervention and you laser focus it, what happens is that student learns that material much more quickly, and they're able to learn the next concept or the next piece that builds off of that much more quickly, so it expedites the learning process, as opposed to what we traditionally do in schools across this country, where we teach it all, we assess it all at the same time, and then we move on, whether the child knows it or not. And then the counter to that, the students that are typically our A students, our 100% students, the question coming back and building off of your comment is, why are they a 100% student, or why are they an A student? What did they do to earn that? A common piece, and I did it myself as a teacher, it's flu season, so if you bring in some extra Kleenex boxes, I'll give you an additional 10 points on your grade. We've all done that. But with this true standards-based system, it's not about the number of Kleenex boxes you do or the number of homework assignments you do. It's about the knowledge that you master. In a true standards-based system, our kiddos that want to advance and want to achieve to the highest level, we allow them to run because they're ready to run. And with the kiddos that perhaps need more time, that's fine. That's part of the learning process. I have a 3-year-old that my wife loves to compare to her other preschool students or classmates, and she wasn't potty trained at age 2, and my wife kept saying, "Gosh, she's behind the class. She's behind the class," and I kept saying, "Honey, she's potty training." And not all kids are going to learn to potty train by August of their 3rd year. It just doesn't happen that way. But that's how we establish our schools. We think at age 6 they're all prepared for the kindergarten standards, or they're only prepared for the kindergarten standards. I think a true standards-based system allows kids to run when they're ready to run, allows us as educators to target their needs so that they can run as well. And in our experience in Maine and in other states, as you heard here, I think the evidence is quite overwhelming in what can occur in respect to learning and the success of every single child.
That is, I think, a nice segue into one of our questions about students who are in special education and who have individual education plans. Can you, any of you, comment on the impact that standards-based grading will have on students with IEPs?
I'd like to just take that and put it in Rhode Island context in regards to the diploma system. When we implemented the diploma system, there was an uproar about requiring all students to do the performance-based assessments, senior exhibition, capstone, graduation portfolio, and there was a big concern about students with an IEP. But what we found is that students, special education students and students with an IEP actually flourished in those kinds of things because they were given chances to revise and revisit. They were allowed, it was customized, personalized for something that they were interested in. They were assessed against a standard and, met the standard when they were ready, but it wasn't that they had to have that certain thing done at the same time as everybody else. So I think that one of the things about standard-based grading is, it is not time-based so that everybody does the same thing at the same day, but that it really is progresses, with the student. So when the student is ready, they are assessed and they're assessed against the same set of standards. But it allows individual students to progress at their developmental rate. So the potty training is one example. But standards-based grading is really about developmentally ready, and not that we're all ready at the same time, on the same day.
Dr. Mossberg, please.
I would just like to build on what Sharon is saying. Just when students are ready developmentally, then they can move on, is something that can be applied to many and all of our students. And I would like to say that in the world of assessments today, with the standards-based environment, we talk about 2 different types of assessments. We talk about assessment for learning and assessment of learning. And those 2 prepositions change the game considerably, because in a standards-based grading system, you know what your end game is, or the product. And the assessment for learning is you're constantly checking in to see how their learning is going. And then the assessment of learning is generally the summative assessment piece, the end product. So we talk about that in the assessment world quite a bit. And I think it's important for parents and school board members to try to remember that in the research, because it's very, very prevalent now. And the researches that are behind that are Willem and Black. And if you ever want to look at it, I can certainly send it to you. But it's important to remember.
Thank you. What about students, high-achieving students, high-end learners? How does this system respond to high-achieving students who are ready to take off?
I can go back to the same example about performance-based assessment and standards-based assessment of that work. that students who are high achieving just fly with it. They meet, they meet the standard, and then they go on to the next level. They go on to the next thing. There's no stopping them. They just, they meet the standard, and then they have another set of standards to meet. And when we think about performance-based assessments in Rhode Island, I've been to many, many, many capstones and senior exhibitions, and they go as far as they possibly can go. And I think, I've seen that they go much farther than, our traditional projects and things where they're given a set thing of things to do, and they can earn their A, but they haven't been challenged as much as when you really push them against a set of standards, and they meet one set of standards and you just hand them the next and they just go with it. And so I think for the the really high achieving students, I think that it actually gives them more opportunity to just continue on and really push themselves.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I think that the challenge,
I'm sorry.
listening to Sharon, the challenge, of course, you talked about the high-end kids. The challenge with the standards really lies in teachers, because do you have mixed classes here, or is it homogeneous or heterogeneous groupings? I don't know.
It is. In the high school, it's more homogeneous.
Homogeneous, okay. So I would think that many of the standards in the Common Core state standards are not, well, they're very intricate and very complex. So you're not just learning one line or one piece of information. You're doing a lot of complex things. For example, I can tell you that in one of the grade 11 assessments that are coming out in ELA, for example, kids are responsible for using many sources of information simultaneously to answer a research question. And and the sources could be anything from YouTube to straight research from MIT, and there's a variety of resources that are given to these students. So the question lies on the teacher, how challenging and how rigorous are those lessons for students, because there's always that meeting the standard. There's a couple of ways you can look at the word meeting the standard: exceeding it or meeting it. There's many ways to cut that. So I think that meeting the needs of high-functioning students lies in the laps of teachers, to be honest with you, in understanding those rigorous lessons.
Thank you. Dr. Holder.
No, I just want to add, talking about students that are, well, I use the term fluent students, and students that like challenges. The standards provide targets and expectations. The Common Core standards has a progression of complexity. So it really guides the student that is the fluent student. As an old advanced placement teacher of English, once upon a time, clear standards were always part of AP English. Rubrics were always there. International baccalaureate programs, very, very similar. So a student who is a fluent student will thrive in a standards-based environment, and the standards-based report card will really reflect on what he or she has done.
Thank you. Superintendent Hammonds.
If I can go back to the IEP question really quickly as well, I think the great thing with clearly identified standards and students that may be on an IEP plan or 504 plan, the great thing is now goals on those are written to target the standard themselves. And so instead of perhaps a yearly meeting to assess, or a bi-yearly meeting to assess progress on those goals, that assessment can occur on a daily basis, and the IEP plan now can be rewritten as the child is progressing through the standards, and that's the beauty of a standards-based system, especially with kiddos that are on an IEP plan or a 504 plan. In respect to those that are fluent, to use your term, I absolutely agree. In just my discussions with kids, a big part of my job and the part that I relish doing is having conversations with kids, and they want to be challenged. And going back to my own days in high school and in college, in speaking with friends and colleagues and in speaking with our current students, I think oftentimes kids learn in spite of us. And as a teacher that I thought I was a pretty good teacher, it pained me to hear that from my own students. However, in a true standards-based model where the expectations are rigorous and crystal clear and transparent to everybody, what we have found are the kids that truly want to challenge themselves and aspire to not just earn the score, but to truly learn the content. It really has made school that much more meaningful to them, as opposed to having to come back the next day because they're mandated by law, but because they get to continue on where they left off, or they get to come back and show their peers and their teachers what they were able to accomplish when they went home, or they applied the standards at work, or they applied the standards in the community in some relevant manner. For our fluent students, it's been amazing to see them soar.
Go ahead, Sharon.
Yeah, I just would like to give a couple of examples of schools where those students that we're talking about, and I think really this represents students at both ends of the spectrum. Our neighbor to the north, Maine, has had a lot of success, and even though they just passed the bill, there have been many districts that have been ahead of the curve in this effort to go to standards-based grading for quite a while. And a couple of examples that come to mind, Searsport High School was one of the lowest performing, academically performing high schools in the state. And since they've moved to standards-based grading, they lead the state in high SAT scores and SAT scores overall. There's another high school, Casco Bay, that since they've moved to standards-based grading 3 years ago, 100% of their students are getting into college compared to about 50% of the surrounding district. So, there are examples across the country and right in our own neighborhood that, for both students, for all of the students, standards-based grading is it's challenging and it's rewarding because they can see that it tells you more about the student, and so the student feels more accomplishment than being given a letter, where they can actually see more things that they've done well. Those standards-based report cards, really are very rich and deep, and I think they feel they do feel more of a sense of accomplishment that they've completed more things to get that standards-based recognition rather than just that letter.
Okay, Dr. McCadden and then Superintendent.
Yeah, it's just, to me, the issue is almost sort of a non-issue in relation to standards-based grading and students who are on IEPs, or students who are high achieving, or students who are smart but unmotivated, or all sorts of different types of students. The challenge for learning is the same for teachers, for students, for parents, whether you're using a standards-based system or a traditional system. I mean, so to me, it doesn't matter which system you're using. You're still, as a teacher, as a student with learning and teaching, the challenge is the same. Mm-hmm. So for keeping people on pace, for moving them forward, for keeping them engaged and motivated in the curriculum, it's almost like it doesn't matter in that respect what the grading system model is to me.
Virgil, did you have something you wanted to add?
I wanted to add to, we've been talking about students themselves, but I think an invaluable component and a reason a lot of folks are here is the family piece. And when standards are transparent and clear, and not just from course to course, teacher to teacher, but across the entire learning continuum, what happens are, when that's open and available from the very beginning, what we have noticed are a lot of our parents and community members have started to make those learning opportunities, or pointing out those learning opportunities at all times. A recent story, we had a parent, was at a meeting, and she was unrelated to curriculum. It was a safety meeting, and she came in and had said that she was looking at the standards that were coming up in her son's class, and this was a second grade class, and she saw that there was going to be a standard on erosion. And they were going on a family trip on a hike that weekend, and she had identified some erosion and started to front load that a little bit for the child. And what had happened a month later, when the teacher introduced erosion to that group of students, the child already had some background knowledge on erosion and the vocab and the science behind it all because the standards are clearly identified, and now it's not just about the teacher and the student relationship, but the partnership with families and our communities.
Thank you. You know, we've been hearing, you know, all of the, you know, the advantages of standards-based grading. In fairness, are there any disadvantages to standards-based grading? And there may not be, but I want to be fair here. That was a question that was asked.
I think the disadvantage is the disadvantage that comes with moving to any new thing, and not to belittle the challenge of moving to a new system. It does require a change in how we think. It does require professional development for teachers. It does require communication and understanding with families. Certainly, students need to be a part of that conversation and that understanding. So it's not to say that it's the disadvantage. I think is more of a challenge. It's not a disadvantage, but it's a challenge, and it's a challenge whenever you go to anything that's new and different. Is making sure that that it's implemented well, and you know you can take the very best thing, very best practice, and it has to be implemented well and thoughtfully. And you know there's so much work out there and there's so many models out there to help implement this in a good way. That it really is, that's the challenge, but you've got so many models and so many people in front of you doing this that, you know, if that challenge is, you know, met and, you know, and you use the models that are working out there, I don't think it's a disadvantage. I would use the word challenge.
Anyone else? Dr. Holden.
And I would add to the challenge that we need to listen to teachers. And they're frontline people. We need to listen to their experience. We need to get their thoughts in the development of a standards-based report card. We need for them to be comfortable, and as was said before, we need to communicate that too. But the teacher role is critical in the development of a standards-based report card. And you have an excellent faculty, so you need to work with them to make it happen.
Virgil.
I echo those sentiments, and I think to add to that, to steal a line from Chuck Schwan, there are some load-bearing walls in our communities that are hard to knock down, and you can't knock them down until you replace them with something else. Or else it crumbles. And a big thing for me that stands out when I discuss this second order change in schools is the idea that learning doesn't strictly have to happen during the school day. And for a lot of folks, we struggle with that. So what you're telling me is that a child can learn at any time of the day in any location, and then they can bring that back as evidence of learning. That's absolutely the case. And the key is, how do we engage all of our stakeholders, and not just our wonderful educators and our terrific students, but our families, our community members, our civic leaders, our business leaders, and understanding what our standards truly mean and what we're trying to build in our students. But there are some big load-bearing walls that we need to support if we're going to knock down some of those old pieces, such as credits and GPA and class rank. What do we do, and how do we identify those things? And the great thing is, as we've heard on this panel, and I'm sure we will on the second panel, is that there are so many folks that are doing this work, and universities and business leaders, and the work environment is understanding what we're trying to produce in our schools, and we've received nothing but support, which I'm grateful for.
Yeah, I'll say I agree with what Sharon said. Not so much a disadvantage, but certainly a challenge is implementation and making sure you think it through all the way and implement it well and thoroughly. But I've got to say, and it's not, I'm not getting paid to say this other than this nice glass of water, which is very refreshing. But from what I've seen so far, you seem like you're really thinking it through and really putting a lot of effort into collecting data and doing your research and doing your due diligence to see how it's being done in other parts of the country. So I'm pretty impressed with that. because that is the key with any reform, whether it's this or block scheduling or name whatever reform you want to talk about, teacher evaluation or anything, to think it all the way through, to do it methodically and plan it and implement it is key to longevity and success. So it seems like you're on the right track with that. The other thing that's not so much a disadvantage, but perhaps it is a disadvantage, is just the fact that this type of grading system is in report card generation, particularly at the high school level, is unknown to this community. And in most of the state, too, as far as the other high schools in the state using this system. So you're kind of pioneering, and pioneering is risky and dangerous, and people are worried. As parents can be anxious, and that's, I think, a legitimate feeling or emotion. I mean, I'm a parent. I've got one in college, one in high school, two in middle school. I'd be anxious, too. Because you worry about your kids, you worry about their future, and what's this going to do to impact them. So I think that's a disadvantage or a challenge, because it's the unknown, and you've got to, within the community, deal with that. And I think that you are, and it's part of why we're here, and why the next group is here, is to deal with that. So again, I admire that you are dealing with it rather than trying to pretend it's not an issue. So that's a good thing, and it's a positive thing for me as far as the potential success for making the transition smoothly. But I think that because it's unknown, it's not a reason to say no. I think it's if everybody kind of really does their work and sees that, hey, what is happening? What are the results at other schools? We'll find out from the next panel. We'll just a start of talking about what do colleges think about such things, or do they even think about such things? I know a lot of colleges will convert whatever sort of report card comes to them into some sort of thing that they understand and they can put into their system. But even if it's not college, you're not talking about college-bound students or students who want to go to college. You're talking about all students. How will this affect them in the report card system, in the transcript system, in the diploma system? It's a legitimate thing to worry about and spend a lot of time thinking about. So, and like I said, it looks like you are, so it's good.
Thank you.
I'll just be very brief. I just think that there is a major disadvantage, and that is report card systems, the ABCs, and is part of our DNA for all of us here. We've all been educated using that marking system, and that's all we've ever known. So it's a scary proposition to think that, our blanket will be taken away and something else will replace it. But we have to keep in mind that the rubric represents the end of an educational proposition that is required by standards. The teaching and learning is no longer the way we all used to know it. So the ABC doesn't fit to the Common Core state standards anymore and what's required. And also with the testing that is accompanying that, and the test upon which we will all be judged. So the rubric makes sense if you understand the whole package. It has to change because the standards drive instruction in ways that none of us in this room have ever been educated. So it's an interesting proposition for all.
Thank you. Now, there were several more questions. We knew that we weren't going to be able to get to all of the questions that were submitted to us. We will make sure that we respond to the questions that we didn't get to this evening and the questions that parents and community members submitted to us online. We'll make sure that we do that as quickly as possible. But now, this is an opportunity for anyone in the audience who has a question. This is your opportunity to ask the panel right now.
I've been listening to this debate in a couple of venues online and in some of the subcommittee meetings and school committee meetings, and I'm hearing what sounds like a real false dichotomy here. We get a lot of the rubrics home with some of my younger kids, and it's impressive the detail to which they're being assessed, or detail at which they're being assessed, and between the number of data points in a whole year's worth of rubrics and those present in Common Core, it sounds as if you've got a great quantity of data to judge a student's performance on. Yet when you get to the end, they're given a number that basically breaks down into pass-fail. There's proficient, proficient with distinction, or there's not. And all of that information is discarded, and so parents don't really have a sense at the end, or even within certain assignments, with any nuance or subtlety, how the student is performing. And can you address why exactly all that detail and nuance is thrown out and basically turn it into pass-fail?
Yeah, and I'm not sure that it's a pass-fail, or in a true standards-based system, it wouldn't be a pass or fail. Students are judged to be proficient against each set of standards with a lot of detail, as you mentioned, and that information isn't thrown out, but it builds onto the next set of standards, the next level of standards, and so there is a tremendous amount of detail, much more detail as a science teacher, knowing that when I used a rubric, there was much more detail for the parents and for the students to know exactly what they did well and where they needed room for improvement. And it never became just a pass-fail. It really was about, you've reached this level of mastery, and there's this information that built up to that. And while it's true that you can't put all of that information on a report card, and working with colleges and admissions officers, they can't have all of those rubrics that led up to that level of proficiency. But that last level of proficiency that's determined, should be clearly communicated to you and to others and to students, that this is the level that the student has met. These are the things that the student has mastered. And you're right, it doesn't have all of the detail of all of those things that led up to that, but it is very clear and very transparent, and should have a description of what that level means, at the end.
Anyone else? Another question.
Cumberland High School is implementing standards-based grading in less than 1 year. Fairfax County, Montgomery County, Hawaii, Omaha, and Milwaukee, somebody on the panel had indicated that they have standards-based grading up to grade 8. I have 2 questions. How long have those districts been using standards-based grading up to grade 8? And how long have Omaha and Milwaukee been transitioning to standards-based grading in their high schools? How long have they been planning for that?
Omaha is in year 3 with high school standards-based report card. So prior to that, they worked in their elementary school, and then they went to middle school. It was a progressive process. With Fairfax County and Montgomery County, I believe it was 2001 or 2002, where they started implementing a standards-based report card, and they've stayed with it now for over the 10-year period. And now they feel they're ready to make the transition into high school. So in Milwaukee, it's really what they're ready to do is they've had standards-based report card in the lower grades through middle school, and now they're ready to what they call field test it in high schools. So they're going to pilot it in selected high schools before it becomes implemented throughout the whole city. So it was multiple years developing in the lower grades, and then moving up through elementary to middle to high school. Those examples that I gave.
I have a question for the gentleman from Maine. My question is, you've implemented standard-based grading in your district. What colleges have you attracted to your district that were not attracted to the district before, now that you have standard-based grading?
Sure. Don't let me forget that question. I want to answer the previous question as well and add to that. We did implement in all of our high schools, much similarly to other school districts across the state of Maine last year. So we're in year 2, K through 12, of implementing this true standards-based reporting system and instructional system. That's not unusual. My previous work as a high school principal in California, our school district started at the high school. And the reason we started at the high school is because we felt we had less time to positively impact our students. And what we knew of our kids, we thought it'd be a disservice and it'd be unfair to them to wait until we transitioned up the students from the elementary, the middle school to the high school. So just some other examples. And in respect to your question about what colleges have we attracted after our standards-based system, did I understand that correctly?
Yes, you've changed your system, and I realize you're a district that's right outside of Augusta, Maine, which is
Yes.
not at all similar to this area. But what I'd like to ask is, have you attracted Ivy League schools to your district that were not attracted to your district before? And what is your overall SAT score? Has it improved since you did standards-based grading, and what were the points?
Sure. To answer the last question, I couldn't really answer that just yet because this is truly the first year where we're expecting proficiency on all standards. So this year, just on initial internal assessments, we're starting to see tremendous gains. But in respect to SAT scores, it's still I need to wait for that because this is truly the first year that we expected proficiency on every standard. Last year we implemented the standards for the first time. But in respect to colleges, we've had acceptances, early acceptances to all the traditional schools that our kids have traditionally been accepted to in the past. Because we went from the traditional 0 to 100 scores on a transcript to 1 to 4 scores last year, there was some real and legitimate concern from our parents that, geez, it's going to be a disservice. Our kids are not going to be allowed into those elite schools. We just didn't experience that last year.
How many elite schools do you have at your district?
How many elite schools in
Yes,
respect to the Ivy
to your
Leagues?
acceptance, yes.
We had a couple
Which
of
ones?
Ivy League acceptances. We had all the elite schools in Maine, the Colbys, the Bates,
Okay.
the Bowdens.
Okay.
Majority of our kids apply to the internal.
Could you provide that list to us so we could see the list of the colleges?
I'll give them to Mr.
And I have
Mitchell.
one other question. I heard the second panelist there say that this has been implemented in K through 8, and my concern is that implementing it at the high school might not be the best idea. And in addition, I have spoken to people that live in Connecticut who are now going through the same process, and what they're finding is that the students, and they're only implemented in the elementary schools, what they're finding is that the students, now that they know they can get a 3, and it ranges anywhere from like a traditional 79 to 90, that they're actually finding that the students that are normally B+ or A- students are preferring to perform at a lower level because they can still get a 3. Any comments on that?
Dealing with high school at home, kids will cut corners as close to the edge as they can. Some kids will as often as they can.
And I would just like to add to that they do that now. I think that's responsibility of the teachers and the administrators to work with students to continue to challenge them. But having been a teacher for a number of years, with the numbering system and the averaging, students are very good at gaming the system and get down to the final exam, and they've calculated that I can fail my final exam and still get a B. I can not do that last paper or that last project because I can still get a B. So students do that now, and I think that's just a challenge of teenagers. Having raised 2 teenagers and now have a teenager as a grandson, that's the challenge no matter how we assess them.
I think we have time for one more question if someone else would like to ask.
Directly, she is a freshman. She's in a honors geometry class. And this is kind of regarding the formative versus summative, and I'm just not quite sure where this is going, but she has grades here. Some of them have a 4, some of them have 95, some of them have both. So as I go through these are her grades for math so far this year. And these are, again, just the grades on tests. I have a 4, 95. Can you help me? Thank you. I have a 100. I have a 99. I have a 97. She's a very smart girl. 97 with a 4. I have a 96. I have a 4. I have a 91 and a 93. I don't quite understand that. And then she has this performance assessment. So this, my guess is that this is like everything, taking it together and seeing how she does now. So the first part of it, she gets 100, 20 out of 20 questions correct. The summative, which I understand is the more important, if I'm understanding it correctly, she got a 75. Anybody that knows my daughter wanted to crawl under her bed because she got a 75. She's worked so hard and she's studies for days before a test. And she gets a 75. Can you explain how we can go from these little things that are working up to the summative assessments, having excellent grades like that? Her study habit did not change for the test, and this is what the difference between the two grades, because the 75 is, as far as I'm concerned, I've gotten my kids in trouble. They get in trouble when they get a 75. That's not an acceptable grade in my household. 75 to me is they didn't study, but I know she did. So how do we go from having the lowest grade, I believe the 91, 93, again, whatever that means, to a 75 with this grading?
Go ahead, Sharon.
I don't think any of us can answer that without knowing, what was expected, what was graded, how, the teacher, that's the teacher's, system. I don't think any of us could answer that without really understanding what was being taught and expected, unless somebody.
I really empathize with you. It's a conundrum. We could not possibly answer that question because of what Sharon said. However, I would like you to consider that a rubric would avoid all of that. But the 90s and 75s, I mean, the rubric would indicate to you and to your daughter what she was doing or how she was doing it and how it was performing, because a rubric breaks down into certain performance areas, and we don't have the time to talk about rubric construction. My point is that you talked about a rubric grade, and then you talked about a grade, and then the culminating grade was 75. What I'm trying to say is that with a rubric, it's very explicit. A parent would not be getting up there saying, what does 75 mean with all of this? A rubric would explain and be transparent as to what it means in terms of what your daughter knows and is able to do. And that's all I can say from this point of view, but it's actually an argument for a 4-point rubric.
Well, it seems, if I can, and again, as the panelists suggested, we don't have enough information, so it's hard for us without having all of the data to assess your concern. But, what I'm hearing is that there's, without question, and certainly my colleagues can jump in here too, it sounds like this particular teacher is using a hybrid system, a combination of a traditional average and a 4-point scale. So I think trying to mesh the two is a challenge. And, one of the things that will happen in not only the transition to standards-based grading, but this transition to the Common Core. The Common Core is much more rigorous than the standards that we're currently using now, the grade span expectations. You probably have heard talk about the GSEs. And in order for students to, achieve proficiency or above, to earn that 3 or 4, it is more than just, recall and, remembering all that was read and practiced in class, but students are required to think at higher levels, a higher DOK, where they are required to do more problem solving, more evaluating, more critiquing, more on-demand kinds of exercises where they have to use what they've learned to produce something. So that can be a challenge, even for the highest achieving students. But again, without having all of the information available, it's really hard for us to respond. But I mean, I think it's clear that we have some work to do. So let me just acknowledge, as a member of the administrative team in this district, that we need to make sure that we're in a position to do this well and do it consistently. So we have some work to do. Now, it is actually a little after 7:30. So we will end this panel discussion. And if you have questions that were not answered and maybe something was generated, a question was generated based on what you've heard this evening, you can certainly submit those questions to us, to me, or to your administrator in the building where your sons and daughters go to school, and we will do everything that we possibly can to get you the answers to those questions. So please join me in thanking our panel one people for answering and being here this evening. Thank you all very much. All right, so we're going to take a little break, everybody, and then we're going to be back in about 15 minutes or so to begin with our panel 2 discussion. Thank you.